Okay, so we don't have a very aggressive agenda today. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you like as we move through. But we're going to talk about the analysis dashboards, the graph tools, like the newish. Over the last year plus, we've been making graphs easier to edit, and then anything that you guys want to talk about. We don't have. I don't have an endpoint, so you can bring up whatever you like. So let me just move this to the side. My script, and we'll go ahead and get started. So what we've found over the past few years is that some of the analyses in TreeAge Pro are, a little bit complicated, and it's not completely obvious when they run one of these analyses what they've actually run and how to interpret it. So we've made a concerted effort over the last year to make those analyses more clear, more evident, at a glance, by creating these dashboards. So we're going to review kind of, I'm going to say 3.5 because the third and fourth are similar, but we're going to review 4 of these dashboards to kind of highlight the changes we've made to the analysis output with these dashboards, and how we think it's helpful in terms of interpreting the results. Now, I'm just going to use this healthcare model. It's CE decision tree. It's just a very, very simple decision tree. We've used this for training for a very long time. And, it's kind of irrelevant how simple the model is. It's just a decision tree with 2 treatments. And essentially, when you're analyzing this model, you'd run a cost-effectiveness analysis. This isn't what I'm here to talk to you about. I'm just setting the stage. And you get your cost and effectiveness, and the slope of this line is the ICER. And the text report gives you your actual ICER incremental values at ICER, and now you have your base case analysis. And if we assume that the willingness to pay were 50,000, then we would recommend the new treatment, surgery and radiation, because the ICER is less than that, and we got sufficient health outcomes, sufficiently good health outcomes to justify the increase in cost. That's not that hard to understand. But when we get to sensitivity analysis, people struggle a little bit with that. So I'm just going to close this and go back here. So let's say we run sensitivity analysis here. And now what we're talking about is, okay, well, there's uncertainty regarding this value. Like, we don't know exactly what it is. We've assumed, and you can see it here, our assumption is it's 80%, that this is going to eradicate the tumor in 80% of our patients that we give this treatment to. But we understand that there's some uncertainty around that, so we're going to run it from 0.5 to 0.9, and I'm going to go ahead and run it. And what you used to get is this. So before we made this change, you got this kind of rash of numbers. Now, there's a lot of information here that's valuable, but we felt that it was a little bit kind of too much, just a big grid of numbers, and people didn't really understand exactly what they were looking at. So let me go back here, and now what we've provided is a dashboard to the sensitivity analysis, trying to help people understand what they just ran, right? Well, what did I ran? I ran one-way sensitivity analysis, which is sensitivity analysis on a single parameter, right? This was the parameter. This was the range. Right? This is important information in terms of understanding this particular analysis. And some information about the model. It's a cost-effectiveness model, and this is the willingness to pay. And it's not a simulation model, it's a cohort model. Okay, so this is just kind of describing what you do, and then here for a little bit more information, fine. And then graphically down here, we said, okay, well, what really happened when we changed this parameter from 0.5 to 0.9? Well, from a net benefits perspective, you see that treatment 2 went from less cost effective to more cost effective. So you immediately know there was a threshold at some point where we change from one strategy to the next being more cost effective. Sometimes it's easier to understand, well, the difference on cost. Well, that parameter didn't affect one strategy, but it did increase the cost of the second strategy. And it significantly increased the qualities associated with the second strategy. So you can kind of see, okay, the cost went up a little bit, the qualities went up a lot. It would make sense that the cost effectiveness was getting better, because you're getting better and better health outcomes for a fairly small increase in cost as that parameter goes up. So essentially what we were trying to do is say, okay, you ran sensitivity analysis. Let me understand it. Let me understand it quicker. Let me understand it, especially people who are new to the technique, which many of you are not. Most of you are not. Try to give you like a little bit of a better view into what was run and why it's important. Now, that does not eliminate the need for these secondary graphs, which actually give you, the detailed information that you want. But we really wanted, with all these dashboards, to give you a good first impression of the impact of this particular parameter. Now, again, what you'd probably do is ICER would be a good thing to look at. Well, actually, let me go back here. The rankings doesn't go away, right? The rankings is still there. It's just not the first thing you see anymore. And now these are the individual model calculations between the low end of the range and the high end of the range. And if you look very carefully and you're used to looking at these, you see that the ICER went from negative, where the new treatment was dominated, still dominated, to the ICER being too high. And then finally, the ICER was under our willingness to pay. And finally out here at the higher end of the range, treatment 2, new surgery, new treatment is more cost effective. But we just felt that this was too much to look at the first. It's still valuable, but maybe it's not the best way to see it at the beginning. And then if you really want to know the exact details of where does it become more cost effective, well, this becomes maybe the graph that you might want to put in your paper. And I know it's a weird looking graph because you have this asymptote where the incremental effectiveness is 0. You can't calculate the ICER, but this is really the critical part of the graph anyway, where you see as the parameter goes up, the ICER goes from negative to undefined to too big, and then eventually around here at approximately 0.75, you reach the point where the probability of eradicating tumor is high enough to justify this treatment from a cost effectiveness threshold. A lot of people don't like the asymptote, so they might instead choose to focus on the NMB. And for those of you not as familiar with NMB, it just combines cost, effectiveness, and willingness to pay into a single measure. And now you just care which strategy has the higher one, right? And so here's the point where I say same threshold, where we go from one strategy being higher to the other. So there's your cost effectiveness threshold for that strategy. So essentially, we haven't really changed the analysis. The analysis runs the same. The results are the same, but they're presented in a different way to try to make it easier, to digest that information. I want to open it up for questions on that.
Yeah, Andrew, I have one that's pretty basic. What makes something a dashboard?
Well, it's just a nomenclature, really. But when we have, we just thought that was the best kind of name for this kind of presentation of results with your kind of controls and secondary results here.
So we're not always looking at a dashboard once we've opened TreeAge up. Only some things in TreeAge are dashboards.
Yeah, but we're moving more and more towards giving you dashboards as output from analyses. Right, there were no dashboards for a long time, and now we're just trying. Okay, here's the summary of the results. Here are the secondary results that you can use to dig into the details. Any further questions? Because I'll move on to the next dashboard that of interest. Okay, so I'm going to use the same tree. I'm just going to right click on this and close all the ones to the right. And the tornado, so the tornado, what's that? Well, tornado, and I'm just going to use all the default ranges that we have. But now we're looking at, in this case, 6 separate inputs and uncertainty ranges for all 6 of them, right? And, they are whatever they are, but, they would have been set by you for how much uncertainty you see in these parameters. And each of these will be evaluated separately, just like we did with the one-way sensitivity analysis right here. We did this one, the one-way, but now we're looking at the consolidated results from the study, in the independent study of each of these 6 parameters. And now you get another dashboard, right? It looks similar, right? It's got the description of what you ran. some information about the analysis itself, the same information about the model itself, and then a little further description of what tornado analysis is. And now we're seeing, and I think effectiveness is a good one to choose, because that's the easiest to understand. Well, there are really only two parameters that affected the effectiveness of the radiation or the surgery and radiation strategies at all. Whereas some of these other ones affected the cost, and a lot of them affected the NMB. So again, you can't really draw your endpoint conclusions from here, from this dashboard and this graph. But what the graph is telling you is, yes, I changed all these inputs, 6 of them, and they had impact on both the NMB of each strategy, the cost of each strategy, the effectiveness of each strategy. Again, when you want to get to the details, now you've got to dig in here, but you're at least getting an essential kind of overview of what happened to your results when you varied all those inputs independently. And again, let's just use ICER to start. You see that now you see the individual parameters, how they change the ICER. Let's just skip this for a second. And you see this one had a really big impact on ICER, including a cost effectiveness threshold at a value of 0.651, where the ICER went from below the willingness to pay to above the willingness to pay at the higher end of the range. And now you would have gone from treatment 2 being most cost effective, where the ICER was less, to treatment 1 being most effective, where the ICER was above our willingness to pay. So you're still going to be using these secondary reports out here as your presentation results, let's say on a poster or a paper, but you get an initial view of what you ran right away, and then you can start to look at the details. This right here, that's what we saw before. The reason it's an infinite range is because this actually approaches negative infinity and this approaches positive infinity, and you can't really draw a bar for that because the bar would essentially be infinite in width. So that we've chosen to put an infinity sign here in order to designate that as an infinite width bar that can't be drawn. Whereas with net benefits, for example, you never have that problem. If I run the net benefits, there's no denominator. And now you see, right, you don't have to worry about anything going through an infinite range because there's no denominator. But you do see, actually, I didn't actually want that one. I wanted the incremental net benefit. Let me run that, where I'm choosing the comparative strategy and the baseline strategy, the more expensive versus the less expensive. And now you see, here's our baseline incremental net benefit, where treatment 2, new treatment, had a higher net benefit than treatment 1 standard. So it was more cost effective. But 3 out of the 6 parameters did have a cost effectiveness threshold where the incremental net benefit became negative, went through 0. So for this part of the range, the standard treatment of radiation was more cost effective. This part of the range and this very small part of the range recommended the standard treatment rather than the new treatment. So again, we're really just trying to give a better vision of what you run, and immediate access to the critical results and graphs that really tell the whole story about what happened. Any questions on that?
Yeah, on that one that has the previous one.
This one?
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's been too long since I looked at one of these. I have a vague memory of why the orange changes sides. Could you explain that?
Oh, sure. And that's part of why we did this webinar, because I think the underlying analyses are interesting, and it would give us an opportunity to talk about those. So I very much encourage questions. So again, if we go back to the original, the original model, and we just run the cost effectiveness analysis, so we're not worrying about uncertainty here, right? We see the ICER is less than 50,000, so this is the optimal strategy, and we see the net benefit is higher than this, which also is the same indicator. It's a different indicator of the same conclusion, which is that new treatment is the optimal strategy. If I did the subtraction here, that's about what, $17.2 thousand. higher net benefits for treatment two. So when we look at the INMB, here's the 17.2 thousand, that's the base case. So if we didn't have any uncertainty, right, this is all we would need. We would know that treatment two is better because it has a positive incremental net benefit. Now you start to see variation based on the uncertainty. Okay, so the blue is the short part of the range, the smaller part of the range, the low end of the range, and the red is the high end of the range. And if you ever forget that, you just come over here and click it, right? Here's the first bar, here's the first secondary report, and here's the low end of the range, 0.5 to 0.7. Actually, 0.8 is the base case. So all of this range is part of the low end of the range. And everything from 0.8 to 0.9 is the high end of the range. That's going to split it between the red and the blue, with the blue being the low part of the range. And I'm not talking about the ICER or the INMB, I'm talking about the parameter. So if this is our base case, then all of this area would be considered the blue part of the bar, and all of this part would be part of the red part of the bar. Now we go back, and here's the blue at 0.5. Here's the 0.8 where it switches between red and blue, and here's the 0.9. So this is the low end of the range and the high end of the range. So that as the parameter increases, the incremental net benefits is going up. So it's making the new treatment look better compared to the standard treatment as the parameter increases. And that's why that tornadoes show red and blue, so you can see whether the change in the parameter value is good for one strategy or good for the other strategy. And by increasing the INMB, that's making new treatment look better compared to standard treatment. This one, in contrast, right? And that makes sense, right? You're saying we eradicated more people or the tumor in more people with the second treatment, the new treatment. So that, of course, makes the new treatment look better. It makes the INMB go up. Now, this is the probability of eradicating tumor with the standard treatment. So if that gets better, right? If the standard treatment gets better, then the relative value of the new treatment versus the standard treatment gets worse. So that's why you see the blue go into the red. And if I looked at that one, right, you see the INMB as the parameter goes up of eradicating tumor with the standard treatment, the INMB goes down, and there's a point somewhere in here where we change strategy, change optimal strategies. And that's what you're seeing right here. That's your threshold, right? So our base case is 0.6, but if we get that value, if that value could be as high as 0.651, now we're not as confident about our conclusion that the standard surgery and radiation is a more cost-effective treatment than the radiation alone.
When we enter the range, we always put in the low value in one column and the high value in another column, and they're the same column for each
That's
parameter.
right.
Does this graph always reverse them if necessary to show us which way?
Yes, there are options. You don't have to do that, but we by default put the legend here to show that this is the low end of the range. That's just another reminder, like going like this, just, you know, another reminder that that 0.5 is over here and the 0.9 is over here. Whereas in this one, the high end of the range was over here. So we do that by convention, but you don't have to do that, right? There's a legend, right? You can say, I don't really want that. I want to do it by the parameter value, and then it'll reverse these. And maybe I don't want the variable description. I'd rather have the variable name because it's not as long. So you have, this is the tail end of this presentation. Sorry about all the rain. It's raining really hard, so we're getting a lot of background noise, but so there's options to change the display as you see. And if you don't like the red blue, you know, you can even change that. I mean, I don't think you'd want to do that, right? That would just show the low end, not of the parameter range, but of the INMB range. But I don't think that's useful. Whereas this one is actually telling you what the impact of the variable is. Variable goes up, treatment 2 looks better. The variable goes down, treatment 2 looks better. Or excuse me, the variable goes up, treatment 1 looks better. It would be a better way of saying that.
Yeah, but I wasn't even.
I'm sorry.
Kate, go ahead.
Was Kate?
Sorry about that. Yeah. So I'm probably just ADD and missing this, but is there like a lazy way to switch the willingness to pay?
Yes, I think.
Okay.
I think you do it back. Let me see. I'm trying to remember. I think you have to rerun it. So I'd have to go back to the model. And let's see. Oh, some of these have options, like these graphs have options. I'm not sure how many of them do. So when you run the ISO tornado, you put the 50,000 in, and I just don't remember if you can. Oh,
Looks like you can add a custom one.
yeah, I could add a custom one. Custom was to pay. Let's make it 60,000 and see what happens.
Oh no, I gotta look and see.
You
what's
do need to
happening.
look.
Right. So essentially, because this is an ISO graph, it doesn't change the baseline ISO. It just says, okay, where would I have any thresholds if the willingness to pay was 60,000 or if it were 70,000?
Yeah,
Is following her?
sure. That's fine.
So, and
Thanks.
then,
I have another, this is
And it-
just sort of a more abstract question though. Since you can drill down into individual bars and look at the line graphs, does anybody ever
sorry,
present a tornado as just like a set of line graphs? I mean, I know it's weird because there's a start and end point on the, but it's just sort of interesting that
I mean,
I was
you
wondering if
could, but
it would be just too
essentially,
messy.
it would be too messy. So
Yeah.
if we look at this one, this is the net benefits one, and then we look at this, and then we'll just put them side by side. Like you can't really, like the ranges would be different. The INMB ranges would be different. You'd have to actually put 6 of these.
Yeah,
So
no, I know. I
right.
just,
So I think it would make a lot of sense to of one or two that are of particular interest to talk about this and maybe run this as well.
oh, they'd have to have the same x-axis.
But you
too.
can't you can't really combine them because this would be different and this
Yeah.
would be different. So there's really no way to combine them in such a way that gives you the detail. And that's part
I
of
knew
the
I was either
problem.
being clever or totally stupid. So.
That's a very reasonable question. It's just not possible. And essentially, if you think about when we ran the one way, 10 minutes ago, right? We had a bunch of graphs to run just for that. Now you think about 6 times that. Now you have another another kind of dimension that's just too hard to present. And the power of the tornado is not so much that it gives you all the details. It's that it gives you the bigger impression of the impact of the inputs. And theoretically, between the baseline ISO or NIMB, the 0 line, and the thresholds, along with the red and blue, you actually can draw quite a few conclusions from that single graph. You can understand the major overarching impact of the parameters, uncertainty in one consolidated graph. But if you really wanted another level of detail, you'd go into one of these. Okay.
The old tornado diagrams used to have a different color for each bar. Is that option still available?
Yes, it's just that's one that I personally don't really like, but it's this one, the INMB.
It's very conventional, yes.
Yeah, so the NMB one, this is a separate bar for each parameter with a different color. The problem with this is the width of this bar is not particularly meaningful, and to me this is a meaningful point, meaning there's a cost effectiveness threshold, that little black bar within, or black line within the bar. But if you think about this is the change in NMB of the optimal strategy. So if we look at this one, right, you see what it's really showing you is from that blue point up to this red point that there's quite a bit of change. But what it's not telling you is that the two strategies are moving kind of together. So it's making it look like this bar is like really, really important, but it's actually not. Because essentially it has not identical impact on the two strategies, but such similar impact on two strategies. That's what's more interesting is this differential versus this differential in the opposite direction, which is the INMB. So while this kind of, it does tell you which ones have cost effectiveness thresholds, there are better ways to get that give you more information, with this being kind of really key to the whole thing. Because now you're seeing that this was a life expectancy right here. See, there is a switch, but it's not nearly as important a parameter change, uncertainty range, as this one or this one. But it looks like it's really important. You know, it's really critical, but it's not as critical as it looks when you think of it as the relative cost effectiveness of the strategies. And if we're thinking about decision analysis in general, we're trying to figure out which is the optimal strategy. So the things that affect that decision, and this is my opinion, are the most important ones to consider, and not the ones that affect everyone the same. Like here, see radiation, for example. Here's a good example. It didn't have any impact on the relative cost effectiveness of the two strategies. But over here, it has an impact, but that impact is irrelevant, essentially. Now, it's a very small impact, but the impact on the two strategies is exactly the same. Right? They move together. Now, of course, it's a simple model. You won't see that in the real model where it's exactly the same, but essentially, who cares? Right? This doesn't matter. This change versus this change doesn't really matter at all, because they were identical in like proportionally to the two strategies. So that's why I try to avoid the NMB, because I think it's, you know, while it says something, I don't think it says what you really want, and it can be misleading if you overuse it or use it inappropriately. Okay. So I'm going to move on to a different model, a different analysis, if that's okay. So let me close all this stuff. Second, I gotta find the model I was going to use. Okay, so I've got a model. This is a patient simulation model. You can tell because you see a tracker here, right? The only dashboard that used to exist was this one, and this one just gives you a kind of a view as to what's in the model. But you'll notice it says, yes, we need patient simulation for this, and the reason is because there's a tracker here that records the number of adverse events that's used for probability and cost calculations, maybe utility, I forget. And also there's a distribution here. Actually, there is no distribution in this particular one related to patient variability or heterogeneity, but that's okay. We know we need patient simulation for this, so we can't run this. That straight rankings, it's going to say you really shouldn't do this because you need patients. You've integrated patient stuff into your model. You need to run the patients. That wasn't what my goal was, but I'm just kind of setting it up. So I'm going to run this as patient simulation, micro simulation, patient simulation, and I'll run, let's say, 10,000 patients. Actually, I don't want to do the one with the patient tracking, so because that'll take too long. So let me just open up this. It's the same model. I just don't, the patient tracking makes it slower. So I'll run 10,000 patients through this model in each of the strategies. And this is the dashboard for a micro simulation model. Okay. Now, what are we looking at now? So what's a micro simulation? It's individual runs through the model. So we ran 10,000 patients through this model, each of the 4 strategies. So it's just telling you that it's a cost effectiveness model. Here's our willingness to pay. These are the average results from the 10,000 patients, right? The average cost for treatment 4 was $375,000 plus. And excuse me, that was NMB. Average cost was 212,000. Average qualities was 11.76. We ran those 10,000 patients essentially just to get these numbers. That's what we really care about. But and I like to use the effectiveness because that's the most obvious, easiest to understand is this is what happened to our patients, right? We had some patients who died like right away and basically got no qualities. And we had more people that lived 2, 4, 6, etc. years. And then we had this little bump of people who essentially made it all the way to the end of the 20-year time horizon. But of course, since it's qualities, they don't get 20 qualities. They get something less than 20 qualities based on the utilities in the model. So, for example, this might be an indication that I didn't run enough cycles. If I've got too many people making it all the way to the end of the termination condition, then maybe it's not very representative of a lifetime model. Does that point kind of resonate? I hope. Wow, I had a whole bunch of people made it all the way to the end. Maybe I really need to run more cycles. Now I'm going to ignore that for now. But you can see that, treatment 1, you had a lot fewer people who made it out to the end. And by the time you get to treatment 4, you had a lot more people that got to the end. So you're getting like a little bit of a vision of the experiences of the patients. So this is a trend graph based on a histogram of all the 10,000 patients stuck into buckets based on how many qualities they got, right? The same thing with the cost, right? There was a lot more variation in the cost, or a lot more people down here on the lower end of the cost. And then the NMB, this is the, the combination of the cost, effectiveness, and willingness to pay into one. And you got a lot of people, quite a few people who made it kind of to the end of the time horizon and got this quite high NMB. And then up here, what we're showing is, okay, well, essentially you ran this to see which is the most cost-effective strategy. NMB is a measure of that, and you immediately see this is the most cost-effective strategy, followed by this, and then this, and then this, as an overall measurement of the cost effectiveness of the strategy after we ran the 10,000 patients through. Now, what we used to give you was this, just again, a maze of data or a big grid of data. And we thought it was hard for people to run the simulation, get this big set of aggregate statistics and understand what they were getting. So we wanted to give people a better understanding. Well, this is, and effectiveness again is the easiest one to understand to me. You see a lot of people died, some people died very early, and quite a few people made it all the way to the end of the 20 years. Again, discount is the wrong word, but weighted based on the utility. And now with a kind of better understanding of the overall analysis, we can start saying, all right, now what I really want is the rankings. And I see that treatment 3 was dominated, treatment 1, 2, 4 were not. Right, but treatment 4 was the optimal strategy because the ICER, both from here to here and from here to here, was under 50,000. So treatment 4 is the optimal strategy with the highest net benefits. And certainly there are additional things you can get, like rather than have the trend line, you can get the actual histograms if you want for treatment 4, let's say. And this is kind of what happened to the patients. All we saw was a trend line before. But now we know, a little bit more than 1% had a net benefits that was very low. They must have died quickly. And a few people had a very high net benefit. They not only lived to the end of the 20 years, but they probably stayed in a healthy state for a long time. So they weren't accumulating cost as quickly, and they were accumulating qualities more quickly. So that's how you get these kind of outliers on the top end. But when we're talking about microsimulation, right? It's not so relevant what happened to the patients, although you should understand it for a fundamental, breakdown and understanding of what the simulation was. What's really important is the average values and how those contribute to the cost effectiveness analysis and the optimal strategy. And I know this is the optimal strategy if I add the willingness to pay line. See that this ICER is less than the slope of this willingness to pay line. So I know that this is the optimal strategy. So again, we're just trying to give people a better understanding of what they ran so that they can do a better job talking about their results, explaining their results to someone who doesn't know what they did, doesn't know their their model at all, or why they ran the analysis in the first place. Any questions on this one? And we'll do one more dashboard when we're done with this.
Do any of the do any of these graphs show the uncertainty around your mean estimates?
Not exactly. The statistics report will give you a little bit on that, the upper and lower bound on these things. So we don't like to use the confidence interval because it's not actual patient data, it's simulated data. So prediction interval shows you, kind of 95% prediction interval around the cost or the net benefits out here. Right, so there is, clearly even the low end of this range is higher than the high end of this range. So you can feel pretty confident about this. That being said, we haven't actually introduced any parameter uncertainty yet. So this is just the base case results. So you can feel confident that at least the base case results are statistically significant because the net benefits are, even the full range is higher than the high end of the range for any of these other strategies. So we can feel quite confident that this is the optimal strategy, assuming all our parameters are accurate. Now, one thing on the ICER, right? It would be nice to have one of these on the ICERs, but you really can't. We're introducing new features for January to do that analysis on ICERs, but with doing uncertainty on a ratio, you can't just use the results directly. You have to do some manipulation mathematically to get a prediction interval for ICERs, and that we're working on for the January release. But for the net benefits, we don't have that problem. I'm sorry. I
Sorry. Can the dashboards be saved, or do you have to rerun every time you want to view it?
No, yes, you can definitely save it. So if you just, when I'm on the simulation results, you could just save it, and you can save it as an RPTX file. That's the same extension that we use for every one of our outputs. But when you open it, it will know, when you open the file, TreeAge Pro knows what kind of analysis it is. It'll open it up in this format. Now, I will give you a warning on that. We try very, very hard to keep the trees compatible from one release to the next release of the software. With the simulation results, we're constantly enhancing them. So if you save one of these results in, let's say, TreeAge Pro 2021 and try to open 2022, it might not open. You might have to rerun the analysis results. But as long as you haven't upgraded your software, you'll be able to open those results.
Okay, thank you.
And that's not just true for the dashboard. That would be true for, let's say, this graph. You could save that graph as well as an RPTX file. Another thing you can do is you can copy it. Second. And you can paste that graph right into a document. Right, whether that's PowerPoint or or whatever. What you don't necessarily want to be doing is doing screenshots, because the screenshots have limited resolution on the graphic. So it's better to use that copy paste to stick these graphs into documents.
And so for the dashboard, when you save it, like you'll be able to click through and go from effectiveness to cost to
Right. So let's try it. So if I save it, and I'll just save it in my downloads folder. So this is sim. Now, if I close it, open it. Well, there it is. You can still click around. You can still run the other graphs, etc.
Oh, great, thank you.
Now, typically you don't need to save that. But that's not always true. Sometimes, especially if analysis runs, long, takes a long time, you might want to save it. But it's easy to save results, and then you forget that you changed your model, refined your model, and now those results are kind of obsolete. So just be careful when you're saving results. I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm just trying to requesting that you be careful with them.
Sure, thanks.
Okay. So let's do the same thing on a PSA model. So this is a PSA model. It has distributions down here that represent parameter uncertainty. So when I run PSA on this, I can't actually run this, right? If I try to run it, let's say, it's going to say, wait a minute, you didn't run patient simulation, and I've got a tracker. So that's a bad idea. So I'm not actually going to run that. I need to run parameter uncertainty and patience. Now I'm going to run way too few so that we don't have to sit around and wait. So I'll run 500 by 500, which is definitely not enough. Just to ignore that. I don't want us waiting around for the results to come out. Because if the micro simulation, let's say it took, 10 seconds. If I then do it 1,000 times, it's going to be approximately 10 seconds times 1,000 times. I don't want us to have to wait for that. So essentially it's running 500 batches of 500 patients, which again, not enough. But for our purposes, it's fine.
We can download the latest version of the manual through TreeAge, can't we?
No,
it'll have
the downloads, we're not really supporting PDFs anymore because something broke and I can't get the PDFs to generate. It's all right here. Every bit of it is here.
Okay,
It's all here, and there's a search. So if I look up PSA, here's our PSA outputs, for example. Some of the outputs related
Right.
to this.
or the new options for tornado diagrams and all of
Yeah,
that.
it'll all be in the latest software.
Okay,
And now what we have is results that look similar, but not quite the same. So what's different about this one than the one we just looked at? Well, first of all, it's probabilistic sensitivity analysis. The fact that we had to run microsimulation on this model is not relevant to the format of this data, but that is what we ran because it was a simulation model. So we ran PSA, and the variance is different between the model calculations, but each model calculation was a patient simulation. That's what you're seeing here. And I ran 500 by 500. It's a cost-effective model with a willingness to pay. And now what you're seeing here is variation amongst model calculations. Notice, you may or may not notice, but there's not as much variation because each of this trend line is representative of a histogram that had just 500 calculations of the same model. But the parameters are changing, right? The parameters are being sampled. So we're seeing, and we can see that here. This isn't directly related to the dashboard, but see what we really ran was we ran this model 500 times, once with this set of inputs, and then with this set of inputs, and then with this set of inputs. So we're reflecting variance in these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 inputs by sampling the values from distributions. And you notice they don't change a lot, right? The base case looks like it's about 5,000. Sometimes you get something more and sometimes you get something less, but they don't change that much. But the combination of all 8 will give you different results than the base case. So now our calculation is 500 recalculations of the model. And this is the variation in the outputs from that model. Again, effectiveness is a little bit the easiest to kind of understand. And you see treatment 1, yeah, there was variation, but it was pretty stable around 10. Whereas treatment 4, there was a lot more variation. And again, the mean was really more around 12 or 13. So these trend lines are showing you a visual representation of the impact of all those 8 uncertainties as they were sampled for the purposes of probabilistic sensitivity analysis. And you see there's a lot of secondary inputs related to this. And we'll just look at a couple of them. Like, let's see, I don't really use this like in papers or anything, but this really shows you the change in both cost and effectiveness as we sample the distributions for each of the parameters. And it's clearly treatment 1 had the lowest. If we just think about effectiveness in general, had the lowest effectiveness, and then treatment 2, and then treatment 3, and then treatment 4. Right, and then of course treatment 4 was also more costly in general than treatment 3, treatment 2, treatment 1. But what this doesn't help us with, it gives us a good view of what the impact on each strategy from the unparameter uncertainty, but what doesn't give us much impact or much visibility into the relative cost effectiveness of the 4 strategies. So I'm going to go on to another one, like let's
A
say,
question, Andrew?
yes, I'm sorry, yes.
It used to be kind of standard to put a plot like the one you just had up, the scatter plot.
I think
In
you're
the
thinking of
papers, and
another
you said you
scatter
did-
that I'm about to run.
And you said you didn't do that in papers, and I was wondering, is it because you find it not very informative anymore?
I think it's a different scatter plot that you're talking about, which I'm going to show you in a second.
Okay,
So, but in general, right here at the beginning, we're seeing which overall the percentage of our recalculations that favored each strategy. So treatment 4, which was the most cost-effective strategy at the base case, is still the most cost-effective, but it was still only the most cost-effective about 43% of the time. So there is some uncertainty about the conclusions of this model, right? We still can say that we think treatment 4 is the most cost-effective strategy, but it's not quite as crystal clear that it's the best strategy as it might have been. Now, I think it was Louise who was asking about the other scatter plot. I'm sorry if I missed that.
yeah, it
But-
was.
I think you're thinking of this one, the ICE scatter plot, which is more likely what you'll see. And but because it's incremental, you can only choose 2 strategies. So let's just pretend for a second that we only have treatment 4 and 3, and we want to look at the relative cost effectiveness of 4 versus 3. I think this is the more common plot that you see in papers and posters.
Yeah,
And what this is showing us is the relative cost effectiveness of treatment 4 versus 3. Notice treatment 4 is almost, well, quite a big majority of the calculation. Treatment 4 is more expensive, a little bit less, but still a significant majority were more effective. But only the green dots actually were more cost effective, because yeah, here treatment 2 was 4 that was more costly and more effective, but the ICER was too high. Whereas over here, the ICER was below 50,000. And then this ICE report will give us the actual percentages, which is 64% of the calculations under the conditions of uncertainty preferred treatment 4 over treatment 3, which is pretty good, but it's not overwhelming. So this would be a model where we'd have some questions about whether our conclusion that treatment 4 is solid. It doesn't mean we're not going to recommend it, but we're still going to have some kind of let's say hedging might be the wrong word, but some kind of appreciation that it's not crystal clear that really is the most cost-effective strategy, because small changes in the actual uncertain or the input parameters didn't take a whole lot for one of these other strategies to be considered most cost-effective, including even treatment 1, 15%, which was the least cost-effective in the at the base case. And we have all kinds of different graphs. It's like here's our acceptability curve. You see that, you'll see that quite a bit. And you see as the willingness to pay goes up, you get more and more of your calculations favoring the more expensive strategies. Whereas when the willingness to pay was 0, treatment 1 was almost always cheaper than the other ones because you didn't care about effectiveness. Now, we know everyone cares about effectiveness, but this is just showing you as the willingness to pay goes up, the distribution of your results favoring each strategy is going to change. And you're going to get more and more of them favoring the more costly, and in this case, more effective strategy. Okay, so a lot of this stuff like this hasn't changed. This hasn't changed. This hasn't changed. What's changed is giving you a vision in terms of what did we run and how can I better understand it before I dig into the details. Okay. Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about today, if there weren't further questions, was some of the things that we've added in terms of the ability to manipulate these graphs. This one, we'll use this one as an example. There's a whole lot of options now, and we've certainly had complaints over the years that our graphs weren't pretty enough and weren't flexible enough. And now I can say, you know, I don't care about the zero line crossing, or I don't want to see the ellipsis, or I want the ellipsis to be smaller. I want it to be, let's say, 80% of my points within the ellipse, or I can go back to 95%. Or I don't want it to be willing to pay at 50,000. I want it to be 60,000, right? And it'll just adjust them. These are things that are specific to the ICE scatter plot, but then there are more general options like, okay, well, I want to say, like, let's say the zero weren't in this. I could adjust the low or the high end to include zero if it weren't already there. So, I mean, I don't really need to do this, but I want it to start at -6. Easy enough. I can actually change it right here. If I want. Right, I want more decimal places in the legend. Now, I don't think I need that. In fact, I don't need any. Turns out I don't need any because they're all integers, so I can get rid of them. I could change the labels. Right, I could say this was in quality, and this is in dollars. Right, and it's just changing the labels, or I could change the top. I'll just put some bogus text in. So there's a lot of things you could do. I could add a line or something. I wanted a line at let's just imagine the base case cost effectiveness is whatever is this. I could add a line across. I could remove the lines. I could add a text box. I could say base case. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to make it up. And I could just kind of put it here if I wanted to. So there's a lot of options now that you have to kind of help you make your graphs more understandable and visible and relatable to whatever audience you have. Boy, I just noticed there was a lot of chats that I had ignored. So I will check them now.
And what if you don't want to pay for color? You have alternatives to circles that you can use?
I think so. So grayscale.
Okay, great.
Right. You can also change them more manually. I could change that, let's say, to yellow, green, or whatever. Oh, I think I need to get off grayscale first.
But you do have different shapes. I see that now.
Right, so you can make them bigger, for example. Now they're starting to run together. Right, but if you had a lot of dots, you might want the dots to be really small. 0 is too small. And I guess it's got to be right. You could, if you had a whole lot. Now that's part of why when you run the IC scatter plot, it says how many points do you actually want to show? Because if you ran 10,000 of these, which we didn't do, right, it might be complete just mess, just a big blob of green, right? So by default, we show the first 1,000. Now in this, I only ran 500, so it's the first 500. But you can just include fewer dots. It still is going to tell the same story. It's just not going to be as saturated. So if I show like 400 dots or 300 dots, it's just fewer dots, which sometimes is helpful, sometimes it's counterproductive, but those are just different ways that you can customize the graph. And let me go back and run a histogram because the histograms are interesting. So here, incremental net benefit between 4 and 3. Right, it's a histogram. Let's say I want a trend line, or I don't want a trend line, or I want to change the bars. There's too many bars or too few bars or whatever. I could change it and say, I really want bars every, let's say, 40,000. Right, and you can just do a lot of things that you didn't used to be able to do to make the graphs more visually appealing and kind of relatable to your audience. Because it's always about your audience, right? How can we make it so that they can better understand that? Now, of course, if I'm going to change it to 40,000 bars, I probably don't want 20,000 act on the axis. So I'd probably change the axis to also be 40,000 with, let's say, no decimal places. And now it's starting to look a little better. We can't always predict what the data is going to look like when we draw it. So you need some ability to make them, more appealing and more compelling to your audience. Now, let me go through these. I totally missed the chat while we're going. Share the recording. Yes, we will share the recording. I know the person who asked that question is leaving, but we will share the recording. Oh, I see Kate already answered that question. Thank you. So I think that's all I had for today. Certainly could take other questions on any topic that you have of interest. Okay, well, I guess there's no further questions. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time. And don't hesitate to reach out for support. You just send an email to support@treeage.com. As long as I'm not on vacation or something, that will come to me. So you can rely on us for help as needed.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all, and I'll close the meeting and appreciate your time. Bye.